Hey friends, Ryan Smith here, the pastor at Common Thread Church. Hope that you're doing well. Happy Friday to you. I'm in my Jimmy Buffett tie-dye shirt, ready for the weekend to enjoy some time with family. Hope that you get to enjoy this weekend as well. It's beautifully sunny here. I don't know about where you're at, but I hope that you enjoy this weekend. Today I was kind of figuring out what I wanted to talk about, but there's so much going on right now with in Minneapolis and with the riots and stuff, and so it's hard. You don't want to turn a blind eye to that, and so today I want to I don't feel like I can solve anything. I don't plan to do that, but I do want to kind of just bring in some different perspective, maybe for us, because I've seen, with the riots now that are happening, and just the craziness going on there. I've seen a lot of people on Facebook, friends of mine, that have been wrestling with that, right? Some people are saying, hey, what they're doing is wrong, and the response is wrong, and then others are saying, no, you can't judge them because you're not black, or you haven't been in that situation, you haven't had your own child killed, or whatever it might be. And so there's this tension, right? This idea that of what it means to hear this idea that, hey, you're not supposed to judge, or hey, that's wrong, and where's that? How does that affect me as a white guy who's in Arkansas that doesn't have that is not a part of that? What do I do with that? How do I sit there, in my armchair quarterback, when I start looking at people and start saying, hey, you shouldn't do this way, or you shouldn't do that way, and then the other response is, no, you're not supposed to judge at all. Don't say those things. And there's that tension, right? Because the idea is that we're called to live in community. And to be in community means that I speak into other people's lives and people speak into mine. And how does that no judgment concept go into this place? And so I want to kind of talk about that today. How do we approach that? How do we approach situations like this? And do we blast people, or do we not blast people? Any of that kind of stuff. And so it comes from that verse in Matthew chapter 7. It's a statement that Jesus actually makes in a sermon, but I think we use that quote of do not judge in a way that I don't think is right. But at the same time, there's other parts we don't get as right as well. And so I want to read this to you. It's in Matthew chapter 7. It says this. It says, do not judge, or you too will be judged. And that's where we mostly stop, right? That's where we stop that. But it goes on and says, for in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with that measure you use, it will be measured to you. And so we use that statement. It says we can't judge other people. It's not our place to do that. And in a sense, that's right, but you need to understand what that judgment is talking about, because it goes on to say this. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eyes. Okay, so if he simply means don't judge, don't ever speak into someone's life, then it doesn't make sense just because a few sentences later he's saying, no, you can speak into that. So first we have to understand that word judge there, I think, is this idea of what it means that I'm not to condemn somebody. It's not my place to say, hey, you're going to hell, or hey, you're not worthy of God's grace, God's love, that you're too far gone, right? To me, I think that's what this judgment is about. That's God's place to do. But then he goes on and says, hey, you are to speak into, you are to remove the speck from people's eyes, but how you do it is important. And that's where it says, hey, look at the speck of sawdust in someone else's eye, but you first have this plank in your eye. And so it's perspective. And so it says that when you do speak into someone's life, how you speak into life is important, and you need to understand that when you go and speak into that each one of us has our own faults. Each one of us has our own planks, right? This idea that if I see where someone is stepping out of line, or where someone is struggling, that it is my job as someone that is communal with them, to share life with them, to want them to be better, that I do speak into their lives, but I do it from the perspective that I am talking about your sawdust, when I personally acknowledge that I have a plank sticking out of my eye. How ridiculous is that? But the truth is that if I really had a plank sticking out of my eye, I would see it. And I would acknowledge that. But that's that figurative language that it's hard for us to see our own faults. But I think what Jesus is saying here is that when you speak into other people's lives, it needs to be with humility. It needs to be with the idea that I understand that I'm a faulty person. I'm at a risk. And there's another great passage that I want to read to you. It comes from a guy named Paul. If you don't know who Paul is, Paul wrote a lot of our New Testament. And he's the guy that we look to that has influenced a lot of our theology and what we believe about God today and what it means to follow Christ. And so we would kind of put him up there as a Hall of Famer, right? One of the people that has it right, and that we would want to, if he was our preacher, if he was our pastor, if he was a friend of ours, man, life would be so much easier because we just understand it all. But this is what Paul says about himself. And it gets a little kind of murky in the wording of it, but I want you to hear it and maybe hear yourself in this, because this is how he is explaining himself. I don't really understand myself. For what I want to do what is right, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. But if I know that what I am doing is wrong, this shows that I agree that the law is good. So I'm not the one doing wrong, it's the sin living in me that does it. And I know that nothing good lives in me, that is my sinful nature. I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I am not really the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it. I have discovered this principle of life, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. I love God's law with all my heart, but there is another power within me that is at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to the sin that is still within me. Oh, what a miserable person I am. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? Thank God. The answer is Jesus Christ our Lord. So you see how it is. In my mind, I really want to obey God's law, but because of my sinful nature, I'm a slave to sin. And so Paul himself says this idea that I know what I'm supposed to do, right? I know I can see what I'm supposed to do. I can look at other people and I can tell them what they're supposed to do. I can tell them where they're wrong, right? We're good at that. We're good at seeing other people's planks. But Paul recognizes in himself, I know what I'm supposed to do. I preach the right word, but I still mess up. I still screw up. And it's only by God's grace, by Jesus Christ, that I can walk and be called a sibling of God, a sibling, a child of God, right? A brother and sister to people that walk in this. And so that is this perspective that Jesus is talking about when he says, look at the plank in your own eye when you talk about the sawdust in others. There is this commandment that we are to live in community. And when we live in community, we look out for each other. We speak into each other's lives. We want to make each other better. So there's this place where I do judge. I do look at actions of other people. But before I do that, I have to recognize that my own sinful nature, that I still screw up daily. And so if I recognize that, then I can speak into that person's life with love, with grace, with an attitude that really wants to make them better, not just make them feel bad or make them feel guilty. I think that is what's going on a lot these days, is that there's a lot of people who are looking at other people and saying, this is what you're supposed to do. And they're sitting in their own nice homes and they forget how much daily they screw up. And there's other people that are saying, you know what? You can't judge me. You can't speak into my life. I can, right? That's the tension. They both exist. They're both called to do it. But how we do it is important. And so for those of us out there who have the privilege right now of sitting on the sideline and just typing away at our computer, may we be people who look into our own hearts, into our own eyes, and recognize that we wrestle with what it means to follow Christ just as much as Paul did. But also may we speak into each other's lives with love, with grace, with mercy, and may we be a group of people who come out on the other side of this as better, as people of love, a people of mercy. And we need to be people who are continually praying for people who are in the midst of all this right now, that they have people around them that love them, and that violence and anger is never the answer. But at the same time, violence and anger is sometimes what comes out, and so grace needs to abound when it does. And so that's what we're called to. It's messy, right? Because what I've just said, I just keep going back and forth. But that's the truth of it. That God's message is not always black and white. That he lives in the gray, that he lives in the messiness of life. But that doesn't mean that we're supposed to ignore either one of them. We're called to live together and to stay together and to fight together for something better than what is right now. So, I don't know what that gives you. I don't know if you want to comment on that or push back, and that's fine. Let's continue this conversation together. I hope you have a great weekend. I pray that things in Minneapolis calm down, and that justice is served in whatever way needed, and that love is served in every which way possible. So may you have a great weekend, and grace and peace.